Should we go back to 6v6? What is the best meta in Overwatch? Which hero is the most hated out of the entire roster? We sent out a survey to get to the bottom of it, and the results are astounding. And we're gonna break it all down, but it says less than 20% of you are subscribed, so do me a solid and press that subscribe button, and let's get into the video. Now, when we sent out the survey, we got a ton of responses, over 340 responses, and this was the spread of your rank. Gold was the largest with 25.2%, but Plat was close behind with 23.5%, and in third place was actually Diamond, which is very interesting because Diamond is actually a smaller percentage of the population than Silver by far. In fact, Silver should be one of the highest percentages that is being represented here according to the population base. So then we have to deduce, what about our community shifts our rank instead of being silver, gold, and plat to gold, plat, and diamond? And I think it makes sense that the average viewer for this channel is going to be a tier higher, considering this is an education channel, than the average Overwatch player. It also tells me that gold, plat, and diamond are the three grouping of players that I need to create guides to help y'all make it to the next level, which are the skill groups I'm going to be selectively targeting in future guides over the next couple of months to really help you. So smash that subscribe so you don't miss out on those if you fall into those three ranks. And the next question I asked is, what role do you play? And this was an interesting spread as well, because I put tank, DPS, support, and flex. And what's crazy is the support was in the clear lead at 38.3%. Even if you combined tank and DPS players together, they would still be outshined by support solo. But also flex, players that played multiple roles, that was also a smaller group than the support only group. Now, this seems absolutely crazy to me because my DPS tier lists are always the ones that perform the best, and my support tier lists perform about the same as my tank ones, which are both far worse than my DPS one. So in my mind, I would imagine that DPS would be a far bigger amount of the player base. So I can only actually surmise two things from this data. Number one, DPS players care more about tier lists for whatever reason, or number two, there's a huge percentage of the flex player base that is also a DPS player, and that percentage actually eclipses the tank and support players that are flex players, but I won't know that data for sure. That's the only thing that makes sense to me though. Now, when you look at y'all's spread of ranks in the supporting role, you can see a pretty normal curve. From bronze, silver, gold, plat, diamond, masters, GM, it's pretty much a perfect little arc, kind of how you would expect things to go. But then when we look at the DPS spread, it gets completely out of whack. We have an abnormally low amount of players in plat for the DPS role, even though we have a lot in diamond and gold, which is just really strange, and a very little amount on silver. For whatever reason, we're not having a lot of players stuck in plat on DPS. They're getting to diamond and then getting stuck there. Very strange. And then lastly, when we compare it to the tank spread, it's just completely all over the place with a crazy amount of players stuck in plat and even quite a few players stuck in masters as well. This is definitely some interesting data, but I also want to point out that our tank responses was the least amount by far. There just aren't that many tank players or pure tank players right now, with only 9.9% of the people that answered to be true or pure tank players. Now, last up is the flex spread, and the flex spread looks pretty par for the course. Pretty simple, you know, a little amount of players in bronze, a little amount of players in Grandmaster top 500, but a pretty healthy curve with a lot of the people stuck in plat rank. The next question I asked was, what was the platform that you play on? And I got a 37.7% console and 62.3% PC. This was about the spread that I expected, to be honest, but when I asked players what game they started on, I got 51.9% started in Overwatch 2 and 48.1% in Overwatch 1. So that's really crazy how it's almost directly 50-50 the people in my audience either started in Overwatch 1 or are new Overwatch 2 players as of the past year. And as this channel was created when Overwatch 2 started and was primarily catering, at least at the start, to newer players that just picked up the game for the first time, I am actually pretty surprised that there's a huge amount of Overwatch 1 players, although my content for the past like 6 months has pretty much been for every Overwatch player that just wants to get better. Now, getting into the interesting questions, I asked y'all what your favorite type of Overwatch meta was. And we did get a lot of specific answers like Bubble Doom, Pirate Ship, and things like that, but primarily there were 3 pure responses that you could answer: Dive, Brawl, or Poke, and Dive took it away by quite a margin, 38.6%, but Brawl was still above 30 at a 30.7%, and then Poke was actually some people's favorite at 20.9%. I'm actually surprised that there are a lot of Poke fans, because I really did expect it to be 10% or less, but it seems that a lot of players do like Poke, even if it's not as big as the other options. People still like it, and it's represented here. Now, another really fun question I asked the community was, what hero would you delete? And I didn't exactly know what to expect here, but in 3rd place, we had Mercy with 27 votes. I was kind of surprised here because I understand that there are reasons that you might not like Mercy, but to be the 3rd most likely character you would want to delete, that's a bit insane to me. And then next up, number 2 was Sombra with 35 votes. And this one honestly makes sense, although personally, new Sombra I'm not too bothered about, like I really don't care. But specifically old Sombra before the rework, I definitely didn't like, especially when I played tank. But I think that Sombra has a higher chance for you to really dislike the character because how they interact with your main, as opposed to some other characters that might just be annoying in general, but maybe not as annoying to get like that vote for deletion. But last but certainly not least, with 46 freaking votes, we have Hanzo, where this was the most by far. People want Hanzo gone, and I mean, I can't argue with this, even though I play a Hanzo a shit ton. I mean, come on, yeah, he can one-shot you from range, he can one-shot you randomly. So yeah, you heard it here. The community votes that Hanzo gets rejected from the Overwatch Island. But the next question we asked is, who deserves a buff? And 2 sizable amounts was actually Genji and Reaper, both suggested. I would say they're about tied for 3rd place, and while I do think that Reaper could deserve a buff for sure, he definitely needs a buff in my opinion. There are some weak aspects to him. You don't want to go overboard, just a little tweak here and there would be nice. I'm not really the biggest proponent of a Genji buff anymore. I think Genji's perfectly fine in the meta. If you're gonna buff him at all, just give him like his ammo back. I think that's fine, but there's not really a reason to like buff his damage or do anything crazy like that. Genji's actually in a good place. I've been playing a Genji a lot this season and been doing just fine with him in high GM. Like, I could see a world where you could buff him, but I don't think he deserves to be 3rd out of all the characters you could buff. You're gonna put Genji 3rd or whatever the case may be. I think that's a little bit too high, but ever let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments down below. Now, a really surprising one, number 2 with 21 votes was Lucio. People want Lucio to have a buff. And this is kind of interesting to me because I do think that Lucio is a bit underpowered for ranked play, but he's kind of essential for some composition, so it's a little strange because if you make him too strong, then he's going to start seeing a rampant amount of play, and I don't know exactly what they would do to make him strong. Like, they're not going to enable the team synergy more, so they wouldn't do something like increase amp or anything like that. They might maybe increase his damage or his boop range or something. I could see that. I could definitely see that justification. It feels like the support role is just so stacked with so many powerful options that Lucio kind of just gets left behind. So I get this. And then number 1, who deserves a buff? By far, 34 votes, Reinhardt. Reinhardt was the biggest voting group for getting buffs. And I kind of agree. I mean, I'm an active Rein hater. I really don't like Reinhardt playing against Reinhardt. I'm not the biggest fan of the character, to be honest. I know a lot of people are. Not really my cup of tea, but I do think that he is kind of like a stabilizing force for the game where if Rein is good, the metas aren't that bad, right? Things are kind of fine, and Rein should be powerful, especially in low elo, but we're getting to a point where Rein is just getting shit on by everything. And I think that Rein kind of represents like power creep. Like, it feels like if we buff Rein to kind of meet what's going on, then the power creep was just completely out of control. But maybe that's just what's happening. Maybe we can't go back, turn back the clock. Maybe power creep is just here and it's here to stay, and we can't just nerf everything across the board because everyone will get pissed off. But yeah, if you want to make Reinhardt able to stand up against all the things that are like really screwing him over right now, I think he would probably get completely nuts. But even in spite of that, if you can't nerf everything, then you should probably buff Reinhardt in some meaningful way for sure. Now, a topic of controversy for quite some time is, should Overwatch be 5v5 or 6v6? And I asked the question, should Overwatch revert to 6v6? And the answer actually shocked me because I gave 3 options: yes, no, and don't care. And it was almost even. I mean, no definitely won with 41.4%. Yes had the least amount of votes with 27.8%, which is like 14% less, but I mean, that's really not that big of a gap, especially when we consider don't care. It was a fat 30%, like one of the biggest controversies. A huge third of the voting block just like, I don't give a fuck. And it's interesting because I think that this response is probably a little bit different from other communities that have less people that are Overwatch 2 specific players that have come from Overwatch 2 when our community has 50-50. But even still, I'm really surprised that no kind of took it home. And I'm also surprised that it's pretty balanced overall. I mean, it's not that far apart. So yeah, I mean, it was looking like we were gonna stay in 5v5. I know that some people were like kind of saying if there was enough community outrage and enough people were for it, we could maybe convince them to go back to 6v6. But I think that something like that would only ever work in theory, even in like a crazy fantasy world, if like 99% of people thought that we needed to go back to 6v6. But as you can see here, that's just not the case. Like, even if our data is a little bit jaded, there's absolutely no way that you're gonna have over 70% of people choosing to go back to 6v6, because we have a pretty 50-50 community, and that just wouldn't make sense mathematically. So this kind of definitively tells me that having the 5v5 versus 6v6 debate just doesn't matter, because we're probably never gonna get 6v6 again until Blizzard releases Overwatch Classic, like, you know, 6 years from now. But anyways, what was the craziest thing from this that you were surprised by? What data do you want to know next? And what hero do you think deserves a rework most of all? Let me know in the comments down below, but thank you, and we'll see you next time.